So in this segment, we're going to be discussing Jeremy Hunt claims more immigration is not a Brexit betrayal. And this story always reminds me of the guy who said he voted Brexit because there were too many brown faces in Tesco's, only to now have to see infinitely more brown people. So Jeremy Hunt has denied the decision to give some overseas construction workers easier access to the UK was, quote, a betrayal of Brexit. End quote. The Chancellor's budget relaxed immigration rules to help constructive employers fill certain vacant roles. Net migration to the UK, a prominent political issue because certain right-wingers have made it so, ahead of the 2016 EU referendum, rose to a record high of 500,000 in 2022. But Mr. Hunt said, quote, people who voted for Brexit didn't vote for no immigration, end quote. He told the BBC they voted, quote, for control of immigration, end quote, and argued the back-to-back policies announced in his budget on Wednesday were, quote, an important part of delivering our Brexit promise, end quote. Now, it's funny how people to this day are still trying to define what Brexit actually means. You had some Brexiteers saying we only want skilled migrants to come here, so how do you define skilled versus low skilled? You had some people who wanted the Australian points-based system and then cried when they couldn't get staff because of the UK's points-based system. You had some say we need to end all immigration because the country is full, pull up the drawbridge, as some said. So now we're seeing the former Remainer Jeremy Hunt say people didn't vote for no immigration, but given the Tories consistently promised to bring immigration down for tens of thousands, I don't know if people clearly wanted immigration to be... clearly they didn't intend for immigration to be lower, the Tories I mean. And when you talk about skilled versus unskilled, some absolute morons think construction workers are low-skilled workers, like the biggest clowns in any place ever who think that. Hunt said he accepted the recommendation of the Migration Advisory Committee, MAC, which advises the government on how many foreign workers should be granted visas. The committee recommended that 5 jobs, including bricklayers, roofers and plasterers, should be added to the government shortage occupation list, all things you should really have qualifications for. This helps employers fill certain roles. People in professions such as on the shortage occupation list are able to apply for a skilled worker visa and take up jobs in the UK. A review of the worker shortages in hospitality and construction revealed that vacancies had risen sharply in both industries relative to pre-pandemic levels. I wonder what happened pre-pandemic to cause this shortage. It was obviously the end of freedom of movement, let's be honest. The situation is that if people actually valued trades in the UK, we would not have the kind of dramatic shortages we have to this degree. They don't really, encourage people to go into trade school as students. The apprentice system is a joke. There's a lack of availability of trade schools in terms of geographically as well. On top of that, it's expensive. You have to pay up front to go to trade school versus university, which you can get loans for. So when you combine all of these things with each other, you can see why the UK has a shortage of vocational skills. And instead of the government actually addressing this, they're putting it on the shortage list, which is fine. The issue is that why would EU citizens with these skills come here when they can work anywhere in the EU without a visa? You can recruit people from further out, but then you have to ask, would they be aware of the UK standards or have the relevant qualifications needed? Do they have equivalent standards, basically, for their qualifications? If you have someone who is an electrician qualified in, say, powerful Bangladesh, would that transfer over to the UK where, the electricity systems are very different? It's another move that makes no sense and makes Brexit look even more stupid. High wage, high skill economy if you can pay for the skills and you can take time out of your day to attain the skills. In a BBC interview, Mr. Hunt asked if the changes on construction workers was, quote, a betrayal of Brexit, end quote, for British people who voted to leave the EU, quote, on the grounds that the jobs would go to them and their children, end quote. No, he replied, quote, what those people who voted for Brexit want is an economy and an economic model that does not depend on unlimited low-skilled immigration, end quote. Mr. Hunt, who campaigned to remain in the EU, said, quote, what people want is to know the government has a plan to remove the barriers to stop people working in the UK to make sure we invest in our skills. That was a plan I announced yesterday, end quote. So you had a plan to train people, but clearly it's not working. What's going on here? And the argument that we had, the UK was dependent on unlimited low-skilled immigration is nonsense. Because even whilst we're members of the EU, we still had shortages in certain fields, like electricians, like the skilled ones we mentioned earlier, because just simply wasn't enough in the UK, enough people that had those skills, and where is the investment into training these people? Also, he's wrong. Did people complain that immigrants were taking those jobs and opportunities away from Brits? People did complain often about not just quite low skilled workers, but also skilled workers. Lisa Nandy complained that EU doctors and nurses were taking away opportunities from her constituents, and then went on to concede that, well, those jobs weren't available to her constituents because there weren't the adequate training numbers to facilitate that. We have caps on the amount of nurses and doctors that we train in the UK. So Hunt is wrong. This sort of shift takes time to plan, and probably around a decade to actually get done, because people have to take time out and learn these trades, get qualified, which can take a few years. And when major changes happen, they would have to go back potentially to get recertified in anything new. If the government subsidises or made trade schools free, the UK would be in a much better position. Also, if the accessibility to these trade schools were a lot better. They could also raise or subsidise apprentice wages as well, to further help people, because at the moment an apprentice gets paid £4.91, which is around half the national minimum wage. How is anyone meant to live on that? The Labour Party accepted the need for skilled foreign workers, but has promised a plan to train British workers to fill these vacancies. Are we going to hear this plan? Do we have to wait until the manifesto? What's going on here? Are you going to tell us? Because, certain MPs like Lisa Nandy are very angry. We're very angry at EU workers for taking everything her constituents worked for. But there's no plan to resolve these issues. Shadow Chancellor Reeves told the BBC that bringing in migrant visas would not be Labour's priority to address the skills shortage, saying, quote, "We would rather have more support given to train up people who are already in Britain." End quote. She said, adding that one way Labour would do this is by reforming the apprenticeship levy to help young people get into jobs. And if only you came up with some sort of idea, instead of getting these sorts of ideas, instead of just getting mad at foreign people for taking up vacancies that we can even fill on our own. And even then, the UK's unemployment rate is very low. So if you do train up British people to do these roles, say you train someone who works in, say, hospitality to become an electrician, for example, you have lost someone in hospitality, and you don't have the unemployment pool to kind of pull from to get someone in to fill that vacancy. So the UK has very much a shortage of available workers, regardless of skill level, regardless of qualification. Countries, I think, generally need around 5% unemployment just to function. So then you have kind of some flexibility within the labour market as people, kind of move jobs or get retrained or, skill themselves up. It's just ridiculous, honestly. The ineptitude to understand things from both the Conservative and Labour Party is mad. And you look at these two parties that are very similar in this regard here. Both parties saying they don't want to increase kind of migration when it comes to skilled workers. They want to train British people. Neither party has a plan to train British people to fill up these vacancies. So, you could literally flip around what Jeremy Hunt said with Rachel Reeves said, and it wouldn't make that much of a difference, really. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think about these two clowns in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.